Hey, so this is going to be a bit of a different video because it's going to be an overview of our first kind of like fertility appointments that we had with doctors and consultants, and then our first IVF. So I met my ex-husband back when I was 18, so a long time ago. From very early on, we kind of decided that we wanted to have children. We got engaged very quickly, all those kind of things. And we wanted to be young parents. And in the end, it actually took nearly 10 years to have the twins, which is a long time. And kind of early on, every month you get excited, don't you? And you're like, this is going to be the month, it's going to happen. And then the tears start every month because you realise it's not going to be that month. And then as the months go by, you get less and less hopeful and you start to think it's never going to happen and all those kind of things. For me, I always had this, no reason for it whatsoever, but I had this irrational fear that I was never going to be able to have children. For as long as I can remember, I had that fear that I would never be able to get pregnant. And I couldn't explain it, and there was no medical reason for it or anything like that. I just had this fear that I was never going to get pregnant. So whereas a normal person would take themselves off to the doctor, get checked out, whatever else, I couldn't, because I always said, and I don't know how, I kind of almost predicted this. I said to my best friend so many times, I was like, I just know the first time I go, they're going to say no. And everybody would say, everyone would say, that's crazy. No, they're never going to say that the first appointment, first tests, whatever else. They're never just going to say, it's not going to happen. Pretty much did. So, long story short, I went to my GP after, years. And sort of said, we've been on off trying this, it's just not happening. And they said, right, have your progesterone tests. And obviously the initial sperm tests. And I went back and got my results, and the GP basically told me that I wasn't ovulating. So you kind of think, oh, okay, that's could be a fairly simple fix. I've know plenty of people that have had like Clomid or stuff like that and had success with it. And at that time, I sort of said to the GP, what about my husband's results? And he kind of tapped away on his computer and went, oh, I can't see them, which I think maybe he was lying. So we got referred to a consultant. So a consultant for the first time, sat in the room, and within the first 5 minutes, he obviously said, right, let's look at these test results. Looked at mine and he was like, yeah, very dismissive about it. He just said, because the length of your cycle and that kind of thing, the chances are they've just not quite caught it right. Although I think I had 2 progesterone tests. I don't think I just had one. But the consultant was quite dismissive of that, and he was just like, nah, you're fine. And they went on to my husband's results, and they went, it wasn't like 0, it wasn't like in the hundreds, it was in the millions, but it wasn't in the high millions, because I think like average is maybe like 100 million, something like that. And I think the initial one I think the initial one was under 1 million, and then they did like a more detailed one and it came back as 9 million. So it wasn't like off the bottom of the scale, but it wasn't good. And in that appointment, he said the words, you will never naturally get pregnant, which was what I'd always, I don't know how, I just knew that was going to happen. And it was devastating, like beyond devastating, because you kind of know it, because it had been years at that point, so you know it in your heart, but you don't want to hear somebody else say it. So we were told at that point that kind of like the option was icsi. So mine, I was like, oh, so that's like a step below it, because I hadn't ever really looked into these things. I was just like, oh, okay, so that's a lesser form of IVF, and they were like, no, that's a step further than IVF. So essentially, if you don't know what icsi is, in traditional IVF, they essentially put the egg in the petri dish, they put sperm in the petri dish, it does its thing, and then they put it back once there's embryos. With icsi, I get a bit technical with this. So basically, to fertilise an egg, it's like people would say, like, oh, you need like 1 sperm. No, you need millions, because they all eat away at the shell of the egg, and then one wins the race and gets through the shell. So it's not a case of one gets to the egg, boom, fertilization. You have millions that gather around the egg, and then they kind of eat through the shell essentially of the egg and get in. So in icsi they use some kind of I don't know, acid? That might be the wrong word. I'm not a medical professional, but they dissolve essentially the shell of the egg, and then a single sperm is injected into the egg. So that is the difference between IVF and ICSI. So ICSI is essentially for people with sperm issues, egg issues, but a step further than like your traditional IVF. So I went away from that appointment already just pretty much told that's your option. There wasn't any change your lifestyle, change your diet, let's see if we can improve this. If it's obviously female things, then there's like 100 different things they'd try and everything else. There was none of that. It was just, it's IVF. There was no, do you think that's something you want to do or anything like that? It was just, that's what it is. So I can remember after that day, I'm pretty sure I said to him, you know, I would choose you over having children any day of the week. I would choose you over, you know, if I had to give up having children, then that's something I would do for you. And then I would cry every day in the car on the way to work, just thinking like, you know, it's life-changing. So fast forward a couple of months, we got sent our first, that was that then. So we'd had funding and we got sent our first appointments to go to Birmingham Priory Hospital. So it's a private hospital, they just, NHS fund it, give you funding to the hospital will call you in. Although strangely we had the same consultant, so like obviously a lot of consultants work across NHS and private. So we had the same consultant initially at the Priory that we'd had under the NHS, even though it was private. So yeah, we went for the initial meeting with him. Then we had one with, I guess she's like I don't know if a midwife's the right word, probably not, fertility, like embryologist. So we had an appointment with an embryologist. She talked us through the entire process. And at no point was the kind of that, is this something you want to do? Because I kind of thought, you know, you'd have a year waiting list and you'd get time to get your head around it. No, we went to the hospital. And then it was literally a case of when your next cycle starts, so when you get your next period, you just call them and that'll be that, you get started. So it was literally that quick and that simple that we were told in November. Yeah, back, I think it was probably November, we were told, right, this is your only option. And on our wedding anniversary, so like February the 11th, we started our first cycle. It was that quick, so it was like your feet did not touch the ground. But obviously at this point, we were really, really excited, felt really positive about everything. Went in for the first few appointments, started all the injections, which were, the actual injections weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be. The bloat is what gets you, because within like a couple of weeks, well, I felt like I looked about 6 months pregnant because my stomach just ballooned, because obviously all the crazy hormones that are like rushing around in your body and all that kind of thing. So obviously the first step being down regulation. So we do like, I think it's like God, you can tell it's a long time ago, like 2 weeks, I want to say. And then obviously they do some checks to make sure that that's all worked. And then they start you on your stims. So you do like another couple of weeks of stims. So that's like double injections, like one of each. And then you're having scans to kind of see how everything's progressing. So they kept saying everything's great. So then obviously on one of these appointments, they'll just make that decision. Everything's great. It's trying to trigger. So you have like one last injection, a day's break of injections, if I'm remembering this right. And then you go in for egg retrieval, which is, so there's like all the dildo cams is what I call them. So like all the internal scans, and then egg retrieval is dildo cam with a needle. So yeah, that's probably enough kind of detail. The camera kind of guides it, and then they use the needle to actually like get the eggs. So we thought we'd done really well, and I want to say we got 11 eggs on that cycle. Thought everything was good. I kind of went down, was recovering. And then you wait obviously for them to call you to say how many you fertilised, and it was disastrous. I think we had 2 embryos and they were low quality embryos. So absolute devastation, because you're hoping to get to that day 5, which means kind of like really good quality embryos, and then they can pick the best. We didn't even make it to that. We didn't make it to 3-day, which is your normal. We had a 2-day transfer, which I was crazily Googling to try and find any like success stories, and there was very, very, like, it's very highly unlikely that from a 2-day transfer you're going to have a successful pregnancy. So I kind of already knew, although obviously you want to be positive, and the whole way through then obviously like your 2 week wait, you're trying to kind of keep positive, but you kind of knew this isn't probably going to be, it's not probably going to be successful. And then I was having progesterone suppositories during that cycle, which were disgusting. Like there's no real words for how just vile they were. And then obviously what shouldn't happen is, because of the amount of artificial hormones in your body and everything else, what shouldn't happen is that you start bleeding before you're meant to go back for your pregnancy test. But I was at work. Gotta get emotional. This is quite surprised at this. So yeah, I was at work and I started cramping and I went to the toilet and I was bleeding. And I knew at that second that it just definitely hadn't worked. And I think I went to my sister's house just to try and like calm myself down because I was quite distressed. But I just knew that that was kind of the end of that cycle. And then obviously having to go back for your pregnancy test. And it was just, and by that point I was in so, I couldn't even explain how much pain I was in. So to go in and obviously just hear those words that it's not worked after everything you've been through was absolutely devastating. And I just burst into tears. I was like, it's as much the pain, like physical pain I'm in, as just that complete devastation. And I was just inconsolable for a good few days. And I don't think my husband knew how to deal with that at all at the time. He wasn't the best at dealing with like emotions and stuff anyway, but I was just in absolute agony. The way she explained it is obviously your ovaries with all of the like crazy hormones and everything. I like the size of tennis balls at that point, so it was just the pain, just you can't even explain it. Which strangely, when I was pregnant, I didn't have that at all, so I guess it's like period cramps times like a million, because your body's trying to kind of process the fact that you thought it was pregnant, but it's not pregnant. And yeah, it was just absolutely horrific. So then obviously I had a couple of weeks to get my head around that. And then we got called in for a meeting with the consultant, which by this point was a different consultant. And I can remember sitting in that room and he literally said the words, that cycle was a joke. And I was like, excuse me, like everything I've just been through, the number of times, I've come down here for all these appointments, I've had all these injections, had all these, you think you're having all the right. And he just like, he looked at all the figures and he rang somebody, I don't know who he rang, basically said that they'd completely misinterpreted my levels. So I was on like the standard levels of stimulation, but they should have had me on like way, way higher doses because they had me down as being a poor responder. So essentially, yeah, my GP originally, I think, was probably right when he was saying that I wasn't ovulating and that my own body just didn't react well to the hormones, and the kind of standard nurses and things that they had didn't pick up on that and just kind of kept me on standard levels, said everything was fine, when in reality that cycle was, it was almost like it was a test, and they kind of went, oh, okay, so next time this is what we need to do. But that cycle, that cost the NHS a lot of money for a start. And he kind of went, oh, well, we'll get it right next time, all the time after. I'm like, well, there's not a time after because I've got 2 funded cycles. So if the next one doesn't work, then I'm screwed. So obviously coming away from that appointment, you kind of was still devastated because everything we'd gone through and it had failed, but kind of hopeful for the next cycle. So then roll on to the next cycle. And definitely believe everything happens for a reason and all those kind of things. Because second cycle, obviously, you're allowed to put 2 embryos back, which technically in the first cycle you're not. I did, which I don't think I already mentioned this, but I did get to put 2 back in the first cycle, but only because they were such low grade embryos. The general rule, or at least back then, which is almost 6 years ago, back then the ruling through the NHS was that on your first cycle you were allowed to put 1 embryo back, and then on your second cycle, if your first one had failed, you were allowed to put 2. So second cycle had completely different monitoring. I had like all the top embryologists, midwives, whoever they were, nurses. I had all the top people, and I was seen by a consultant regularly, Whereas in the first cycle, I didn't really see those people at all. I just had the kind of junior nurses doing everything the kind of standard, because I suppose they just thought it was male factor. They didn't really observe me in the same way. So then second round, everything was done to the book properly. All my levels were checked properly and everything like that. So second cycle, deep breath, second cycle, we got, get this right now, 12 eggs retrieved, 6 fertilized, 4 matured, and then 2 obviously transferred, which are the twins. So yeah, the second cycle was completely different, because everything just, I don't know, it was so much harder to feel positive because we'd already had that one failed cycle, and also because it was our only chance. I think with the first cycle failing, you kind of think, well, that's okay because we've got another. But with that second one, there was so much riding on it that it was just terrifying, because if it had gone wrong, if it had to be stopped for any reason, anything like that, there wasn't another chance. So let's think. I think I was 5 days past 5. No, that can't be right, because I didn't have a 5-day transfer. So I must have been 7 days past 3-day transfer. Yeah, because it was very early, but I can remember I started to have just very slight cramping, and I just had that feeling again of, like, I thought I knew that it had failed, basically. I wasn't bleeding or anything, but I just had it in my head, it's not worked. And I just thought, I need to do a test just to, like, which, I mean, it was stupid, because if it had been negative, then it was so early on that it probably would have been wrong anyway, because it was just so early, if that makes sense. So I was like, right, I'm going to do a test just to kind of start getting my head around the fact that it's not worked. And I did a test, and it was the brightest. Like, I should have known at that second that it was twins, because it wasn't a faint positive, and it was, essentially, it would be like if you were 10 days, like, so 4 days before your period was due, essentially. So massively early, but it was a very clear second line, and I could have fell off the toilet because I was just like shocked. I did it like instantly. It was there instantly as well. It wasn't like a wait a minute or two, and I'd never been pregnant by any, never been even slightly pregnant, you know what I mean. So I like saw this line, I was like, oh my God. And I remember at that point kind of picking the phone up, because I hadn't obviously told my husband at the time that I was going to do a test or anything. So I kind of picked the phone up, he was at work, and I kind of rang him, and I was like, I told him, I expected him to be screaming and shouting and like bouncing off the walls, and he just kind of went, oh okay. And I just thought, oh, he's at work, he can't get excited around the people that he's around or that kind of thing. And then obviously that's where it all started to unravel, and that's a whole nother video, because that is, yeah, how IVF and all that kind of thing can like affect your marriage, your life, everything. Because obviously he would say now that he was never really asked if he wanted to do the IVF, which I don't think either of us ever really stopped to think about it. It was just the kind of like, you want a baby, that's what you do. But by kind of like 12 weeks pregnant, he was completely like, we weren't in the same boat. We weren't even like vaguely going in the same direction. He would say he couldn't feel anything for the pregnancy. He couldn't get excited. We sat in the kind of 12-week scan, and he was just like, don't feel anything. I was like, what? Like, I can't even now, like, I don't think I'll ever quite get my head around how that happened. But it's hard to explain how you wanted a baby. So, and he wanted a baby. It wasn't like I was dragging him into this. He wanted a baby as much as I did. And then at that point, it was just, I don't know if this is what I want. I don't know if I love you. And that is, yeah, that's where we were. It kind of all just crumbled within, a matter of weeks, from being together for 10 years at that point, 9 coming up 10 years at that point, to no. So that's going to be a whole nother video of kind of how that all unraveled completely, from that point to the point when they were born, to the point when we split up. But that's the happy bit. That's the we got pregnant, and that's meant to be the goal. It's meant to be you get to that point and everything's okay. But with IVF, I hate to say the word, but it's a curse. I don't really know anybody that's done IVF and stayed together, as sad as that is, because you're so desperate to get to that point, and then it's the toughest stuff. It's not even the physical side, it's the emotional side and all that kind of thing. And obviously you're so obsessed with it being, it's about you, it's about the baby. You kind of sometimes forget that it's about your partner too. So I'll definitely make another video on that, but that was the quick, well, 20 minutes, the fairly quick version of how the twins came to be.